The morning the company changed hands, everything felt like a slow-motion nightmare. I was in my office, scanning through quarterly reports, when the email popped up, an official notice that my uncle, Martin, was now the new CEO of our family business. The subject line read, "Leadership transition effective immediately." My heart sank as I read the words again, struggling to believe what they meant. Just hours later, the front office buzzed with whispers, and then Martin himself appeared, sharp in a tailored suit, his smile cold and calculated. He didn't waste time. "I'm here to make some changes," he announced, his gaze fixed on me. "Starting with your position. Effective today, you're relieved of your duties." The words hit me like a blow. Fired. By family. By my own uncle. I blinked, hoping for a mistake, a joke, anything to soften the blow. But his tone was final, unyielding. "You're no longer part of this company." The room felt suddenly smaller, the walls closing in. I wanted to argue, to demand an explanation, but the weight of his authority crushed every word before it left my lips. The staff exchanged uncomfortable glances, the air thick with tension. I gathered my things mechanically, every movement numb and surreal. As I walked out, the familiar hum of the office felt suffocating, the place I had once called my professional home now alien and hostile. Outside, the sky was overcast, matching the storm brewing inside me. How had it come to this? Just days before, I had been spearheading a major project, celebrated for my leadership and vision. Yet in the blink of an eye, my uncle's arrival had upended everything. The man who once seemed distant, a mere relative at family gatherings, was now wielding power that shattered my world. The betrayal stung sharper than I expected. It wasn't just a job lost, it was a severing of trust, a personal rejection disguised in corporate jargon. I had thought family meant support, a shared legacy to protect, not a battlefield where alliances shifted like sand. The realization settled deep, this was more than business. It was personal. As I sat alone in a quiet cafe later that afternoon, I replayed the confrontation over and over. Martin's calculated smile, the cold efficiency in his voice. There was no warmth, no hesitation. Just a ruthless determination to take control, no matter the cost. I wondered if he had planned this all along, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And if so, how many others had been swept aside in his path? The company, once vibrant and full of promise, now felt like a fragile house of cards. I could already sense the subtle shifts, whispers among colleagues, shifting loyalties, the sudden absence of familiar faces in meetings. Martin's takeover was more than a change in leadership, it was a seismic upheaval shaking the very foundations of our shared history. Despite the shock, a flicker of something else began to grow inside me, confusion mingled with a spark of defiance. I wasn't ready to disappear quietly. The company was part of my identity, my dreams woven into its fabric. To be cast out so abruptly felt like a challenge, a gauntlet thrown down in the middle of a fight I hadn't even seen coming. That evening, I returned home, carrying the weight of the day like a stone in my chest. The silence of my apartment was oppressive, each empty room echoing the loss. I sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker, feeling isolated despite the millions of lives bustling just beyond the glass. My phone buzzed, messages from colleagues expressing sympathy, some uncertain, others clearly aligning with the new regime. The division was already clear. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by dreams of boardrooms and broken promises. In the early hours, I awoke with a start, heart pounding, the sense of displacement overpowering. How could family become the source of such profound upheaval? The question lingered, unanswered but impossible to ignore. The next morning, I forced myself to face the day. I dressed carefully, trying to reclaim some semblance of control. The company's building loomed ahead, a monument to years of hard work and ambition. But now, it felt like a fortress I was locked out of. I stood there for a moment, the cold wind biting at my skin, before turning away. Today, I was no longer part of that world. As I walked through the city streets, I couldn't help but notice the subtle changes already taking root within the company's sphere. Rumors began to swirl, Martin's aggressive restructuring plans, whispered dismissals, the alienation of loyal clients. The very culture I had nurtured seemed under siege, replaced by a harsh, transactional approach that left little room for the values I held dear. It was clear that Martin's vision for the company was starkly different from mine. Where I had sought collaboration and innovation, he pursued control and consolidation. The clash of ideals was more than professional, it was deeply personal. Watching from the outside, I felt a mix of sorrow and anger. How had my uncle become the architect of this transformation? And at what cost? The loss of my position was not just a professional setback, it was a fracture in the family's legacy. The company had always been a symbol of our shared history, a testament to years of dedication and sacrifice. Now, that legacy was being rewritten without me, my contributions erased in a single stroke. The pain cut deep, a wound that no amount of rationalization could heal. But beneath the hurt, determination began to take root. I refused to let this be the end of my story. Being fired by family was a betrayal, yes, but it was also a call to action. If the company was drifting into dangerous waters under Martin's leadership, then someone had to step up. Someone who understood its heart and soul, who cared not just about profits but about people. I resolved to fight, not with anger or revenge, but with strategy and resilience. The road ahead would be uncertain, filled with obstacles and doubt. But I would not vanish into the shadows of this family feud. Instead, I would find a way to reclaim my place, to prove that the company, and I, were worth fighting for. That afternoon, I began reaching out to old contacts, colleagues who had stood by me through years of challenges and triumphs. Their responses were tentative but hopeful, reminders that not everyone had accepted Martin's takeover without question. I listened carefully, gathering fragments of information, sensing the cracks in the new regime's armor. The fire inside me grew, fueled by memories of what the company had been, and what it could become again. I knew the path ahead would be difficult, fraught with betrayal and uncertainty. But for the first time since that devastating morning, I felt a spark of hope. The story was far from over. The battle for my family's company, and my own future, had only just begun. Days after my ousting, I found myself haunted not just by the memory of that brutal morning, but by the eerie silence that had settled over the company I once called my own. The boardroom, once a place of lively debate and shared vision, was now a chamber of whispered discontent, a fortress of decisions made behind closed doors where my voice no longer mattered. I started piecing together what had shifted since Martin took control, not just the leadership, but the very pulse of the company was changing under his rule. I spent hours retracing my steps through old client files and project reports, searching for clues in the patterns of turnover and delays. What I uncovered was unsettling. Key clients I had cultivated for years were growing restless, their loyalty wavering as Martin's aggressive tactics alienated them. The contracts that had once been renewed with ease were now slipping through the cracks, lost to competitors who promised steadiness in a sea of chaos. It wasn't just the clients who were affected. The team, my team, was unraveling. I heard through whispers and half-truths that morale was plummeting, trust eroding beneath the weight of Martin's authoritarian style. Where I had encouraged collaboration and creative freedom, he imposed strict hierarchies and cutthroat strategies. The energy that had fueled innovation was now suffocated under a cloud of fear and uncertainty. One afternoon, I met with Jenna, a trusted project manager who had been with the company through thick and thin. She hesitated at first, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting walls to have ears. "It's different now," she confided, her voice low. "Martin's making decisions without consulting anyone. People are scared to speak up. We're losing clients because there's no follow-through, no personal touch." Her words echoed the unease I had sensed but hadn't fully grasped. It wasn't merely a change in leadership, it was a fundamental shift in the company's DNA. The values I had fought to instill, respect, transparency, and a commitment to people, were being trampled in pursuit of quick wins and ruthless expansion. I began compiling evidence, gathering client feedback, employee testimonials, and financial reports that painted a troubling picture. Sales were slipping, key partnerships were dissolving, and the company's reputation was quietly eroding. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became that Martin's mismanagement wasn't just reckless, it was threatening the company's very existence. At night, I pored over spreadsheets and emails, connecting dots that others might have missed. The numbers told a story of decline, of missed opportunities and fractured relationships. I could almost feel the company slipping through my fingers, a sinking ship piloted by someone who didn't understand its soul. But beneath the gloom, a fierce resolve took root. This wasn't just about statistics or profits, it was about salvaging what was left of a legacy built over decades. Martin's takeover might have blindsided me, but it hadn't broken me. I was determined to expose the damage and, if possible, reverse it. One evening, I received a call from Paul, a longtime client who had been wavering since the leadership change. His voice was cautious, tinged with disappointment. "I don't know what's happening over there," he said, "but the personal touch is gone. Our emails go unanswered, meetings get cancelled last minute. It's like the company forgot who we are." His words struck like a blow. I remembered the countless hours spent nurturing that relationship, the trust we had built through transparency and collaboration. Now, it was unraveling, thread by thread. I realized then that Martin's approach was not just alienating clients, it was dismantling the foundation of everything we had worked for. Determined to understand the full scope of the damage, I reached out to other contacts discreetly, gathering stories that echo Paul's experience. Patterns emerged, important deals were stalling, key employees were resigning or being pushed out, and the culture of openness was being replaced by suspicion and control. Despite the growing evidence, I knew that confronting Martin directly would be dangerous. His grip on the company was tight, and any open challenge could backfire spectacularly. Instead, I focused on quietly building a case, documenting every misstep and mismanagement with precision. If I was going to reclaim any part of the company's future, I would need more than anger, I would need facts, strategy, and allies. In the meantime, I grappled with a personal toll. Being cast out had left a raw ache, a sense of rejection that seeped into every corner of my life. Friends and family were divided, some sympathized, others sided with Martin. The betrayal cut deep, but I refused to let it define me. Instead, I channeled the pain into purpose, reminding myself that I was fighting not just for a company, but for a vision of what it could and should be. Late one night, as I sifted through emails, I stumbled upon a message from a former employee who had just resigned. The tone was bitter, filled with frustration over the toxic environment Martin had created. "I can't work like this anymore," it read. "The passion, the care, it's all gone. It's just business now, and not the kind I signed up for." That message crystallized everything. Martin wasn't just mismanaging the company, he was dismantling its heart. The very people who had made it strong were fleeing, leaving behind a shell that might crumble without them. I realized that the stakes were higher than I had imagined. This wasn't just a personal loss, it was a crisis that could destroy a company that had been a pillar in our industry for decades. And if Martin's mismanagement continued unchecked, the consequences would ripple far beyond our family. With that sobering thought, I doubled down on my efforts. I reached out to industry contacts, seeking advice and support. I began drafting a plan to present to the board, a comprehensive overview of the damage and a roadmap for recovery. It was a daunting task, but I knew it was the only way forward. Amid the turmoil, I found unexpected pockets of hope. A few loyal employees reached out, sharing their fears but also their desire for change. Their trust was fragile but genuine, a reminder that the company's spirit hadn't been entirely extinguished. I resolved to be their voice, to fight for the culture and values that Martin seemed determined to erase. Each day brought new challenges and new revelations, but also a growing clarity. Martin's takeover was more than a hostile takeover of a business, it was an assault on everything the company stood for. And if I was going to reclaim my place, I would need to confront not only him, but the damage his leadership had inflicted. As the weeks passed, I felt a shift within myself, a movement from shock and confusion to determination and purpose. The journey ahead would be difficult, filled with uncertainty and conflict. But I was no longer a victim of circumstance. I was a force to be reckoned with, ready to fight for the company's future, and for my own. The company I loved was faltering under Martin's reign, but I was gathering the pieces to fight back. I wasn't sure what the outcome would be, but one thing was certain, I would not let this legacy die without a fight. I remember the moment the full weight of my dismissal hit me, not as a professional loss, but as a personal rejection that cut deeper than I'd ever imagined. The echo of Martin's words still rang in my ears, "You're relieved of your duties." Those 6 words crushed years of dedication, loyalty, and belief in a future I had envisioned. I was unemployed, discarded by the family I thought I could trust, and left to wrestle with a storm of emotions that threatened to consume me. For days, I oscillated between disbelief and despair. The office, once my second home, now felt like a distant memory, a place where I no longer belonged. The silence in my apartment was deafening, filled with the ghosts of conversations that would never happen again. I questioned everything, my worth, my choices, even my identity. How could the people I had trusted most turn their backs on me so swiftly, so coldly? Yet amid the swirling emotions, a fierce ember of resolve began to glow. I refused to let this be the end of my story. Being cast out was not an answer, it was a challenge. A challenge to prove that I was more than a title, more than a cog in a family business. I was determined to reclaim my place, not just for myself, but for the company and the legacy that Martin sought to dismantle. The initial days were a blur of uncertainty. I reached out to close friends, trying to anchor myself in their support. Their words offered comfort, but also a stark reminder: the path ahead would be lonely and fraught with obstacles. I knew I had to start rebuilding, from the ground up, a foundation strong enough to support the comeback I envisioned. Networking became my lifeline. I dusted off old contacts, sending careful emails and making tentative calls. Each conversation was a step toward reconnecting with an industry that seemed to have moved on without me. Some responses were warm, others cautious, but none dismissed me outright. There was still recognition of the work I had done, the relationships I had built. It was a fragile thread, but it was enough. I attended industry events alone, a stark contrast to the confident leader I once was. Standing in crowded rooms, I felt the sting of invisibility, the subtle sideways glances from former colleagues now aligned with Martin's regime. But I refused to shrink. Instead, I listened, learned, and watched. Every interaction was a chance to rebuild trust, to remind people that I was still here, still fighting. At one such event, I ran into Laura, an old ally and a sharp mind in our sector. Her eyes widened in surprise when she saw me. "I heard what happened," she said quietly. "I'm sorry. But you know, there are still people who believe in you." Her words were a balm, a spark that ignited renewed determination. With Laura's encouragement, I began to map out a plan. If Martin was steering the company into troubled waters, I needed a strategy to counteract it. It wasn't just about holding on to the past, it was about envisioning a future where the company could thrive again. But first, I had to prove my worth beyond the family name. I started small, consulting on projects, offering insights where I could, and slowly building a portfolio of work that reminded people of my capabilities. Each success, no matter how minor, was a brick in the foundation I was reconstructing. The process was slow and often discouraging, but I clung to the belief that perseverance would pay off. Meanwhile, the emotional toll was relentless. Nights were the hardest, when silence crept in and doubts whispered their cruelest lies. Was I really cut out for this fight? Had I misread my own importance? I grappled with vulnerability I rarely allowed myself to show. But every morning, I pulled myself up, steeled my resolve, and faced the world anew. I also confronted the reality of the family fracture. Conversations with relatives were strained, laced with unspoken accusations and guarded sympathies. Some sided with Martin, seeing me as a threat to the new order. Others were torn, caught between loyalty and the desire for harmony. I learned that family loyalty was a fragile currency, easily devalued in the face of power struggles. Despite this, I refused to burn bridges. I knew that bitterness would only isolate me further. Instead, I sought to understand the motivations behind Martin's actions, even as I prepared to challenge them. This clarity helped me separate personal pain from professional strategy, a crucial distinction in the battles to come. One afternoon, while reviewing my notes, I found an old letter from my father, a reminder of the values he had instilled in me: integrity, resilience, and the importance of standing firm in adversity. His words resonated deeply, fueling my determination. I wasn't just fighting for a job, I was fighting for the principles that defined me. As weeks turned into months, my efforts began to bear fruit. A small consulting contract led to another, and then an opportunity to lead a project with a respected client who had grown wary of Martin's leadership. Each victory was a quiet reclaiming of my professional identity, a step toward proving that I was more than the circumstances that had been thrust upon me. Yet, I knew the road ahead was still long. The wounds from being ousted by family were raw, and the battle to regain my place in the company, and in my own life, would require every ounce of strength I could muster. But the fire inside me, once flickering, now burned bright. In moments of solitude, I reflected on the lessons learned. Being rejected by family and career was devastating, but it had also revealed a core truth: my worth was not determined by titles or bloodlines, but by my resilience and the courage to keep moving forward. I was no longer defined by the loss, but by the fight that followed. With renewed purpose, I embraced the uncertainty of the future. The path was uncharted and filled with challenges, but I was ready to face them head-on. The fight to reclaim my place had begun, not with anger or despair, but with quiet determination and an unshakable belief in what was possible. And so, I stepped into the world again, scarred but unbroken, prepared to prove that being fired by family was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I would rise, not just for myself, but for everything I believed the company could still become. The days turned into weeks as I quietly began to build a case, not just in my mind, but with hard evidence, data that would speak louder than my bruised pride. I reached out to industry contacts, former colleagues, and clients, piecing together a mosaic of the company's faltering state under Martin's leadership. It was painstaking work, a mix of late-night calls and meticulous analysis, but each fragment added weight to the story I needed to tell. I pored over financial reports, comparing projections with actual results. The numbers painted a grim picture: declining revenues, missed targets, and a growing list of lost clients. I wasn't just gathering complaints, I was assembling proof of mismanagement, of a leadership style that was driving the company toward the edge. The data was cold and undeniable, a stark contrast to the warm memory I held of the company's former vitality. Alongside the numbers, I collected testimonials, quiet whispers from employees who feared speaking out openly, but were willing to share their experiences with me. Their voices told of a culture unraveling, of morale plummeting under the weight of arbitrary decisions and broken promises. Some spoke of key team members resigning, others of important projects left in limbo. It was a portrait of a company losing its heart. With every piece of evidence, my resolve hardened. This wasn't just a personal vendetta, it was a fight to save something bigger than myself. I drafted a strategic plan, envisioning a path that could restore stability and trust. It involved securing a major deal, something that would not only bring in vital revenue but also signal to clients and stakeholders that the company was still a force to be reckoned with. I reached out to a few trusted investors and partners, cautiously testing the waters. Their responses were tentative but encouraging. Many had been watching the company's decline with concern but lacked a clear alternative. My plan offered hope, a chance to turn the tide if I could deliver on it. Meanwhile, I continued to rebuild my network, reconnecting with former allies and seeking new ones. Each meeting was an opportunity to listen, to learn, and to lay the groundwork for the comeback I envisioned. I kept my demeanor measured, knowing that patience and strategy were my best weapons against the more powerful forces aligned against me. One evening, as I reviewed the draft of my strategic plan, my phone buzzed with a message from Jenna, the project manager I trusted. "We need to talk. Some clients are ready to walk. Martin's decisions are causing panic." Her words confirmed what I feared: the situation was deteriorating faster than I had anticipated. I arranged a discreet meeting with a few key clients who had expressed concerns. Sitting across from them in a small conference room, I listened as they laid bare their frustrations, broken promises, lack of communication, and a sense that the company no longer valued their partnership. Their faith in Martin's leadership was waning, and they were considering alternatives. It was a critical moment. I shared my vision for a renewed approach, one centered on transparency, collaboration, and strategic growth. I didn't promise miracles, but I offered a commitment to restore the trust that had been broken. Their cautious optimism was a lifeline, a sign that my efforts were not in vain. Back at home, I spent hours refining my plan, integrating client feedback and market analysis. I sought advice from legal counsel and business advisors, ensuring that every detail was thorough and defensible. The stakes were high. This was more than a proposal, it was a blueprint for redemption. As the plan took shape, I felt a surge of confidence. I was no longer reacting to my dismissal, I was proactively shaping a future. The work was exhausting, the pressure immense, but the purpose was clear. I was building not just a business case, but a foundation for reclaiming my place. In the quiet moments, doubts still crept in. Would the board listen? Could I overcome the entrenched power Martin wielded? But I pushed these thoughts aside, focusing on the tangible progress I was making. Every call, every meeting, every spreadsheet was a step closer to turning the tide. One afternoon, I received an unexpected call from an old mentor, someone who had guided me early in my career. His voice was warm but serious. "I've been following the situation. If you're ready, I can introduce you to some investors who might be interested in backing your plan." The offer was a beacon of hope, an opportunity to strengthen my position with allies who understood the stakes. With his support, I expanded my network of potential backers, sharing my strategic vision and the evidence I had gathered. Their questions were tough, their scrutiny relentless, but I was prepared. The feedback sharpened my approach, making the plan stronger and more resilient. Despite the growing momentum, I remained cautious. Martin's influence was far-reaching, and I knew that any misstep could undermine everything. I kept my efforts discreet, balancing the need to build support with the risk of provoking a premature confrontation. As I prepared to present my plan to key stakeholders, I reflected on how far I had come. From the shock of being fired to this moment of quiet, determined action, the journey had transformed me. I was no longer defined by loss but by the strength to fight back. The days ahead would test every ounce of that strength. But armed with evidence, allies, and a clear vision, I was ready to make my move. The company's future, and my own, depended on it. Martin's smug grin was unmistakable the moment I walked into the industry conference room. He stood near the podium, basking in the glow of the spotlight, boasting openly about his control of the company. His voice carried through the room, confident and dismissive. "The company is in capable hands," he declared, "and the old guard will soon be a thing of the past." The words stung, especially coming from a man whose decisions I knew were unraveling the very fabric of what we had built. The crowd around him nodded politely, some with genuine interest, others with a wary glance that betrayed their doubts. I felt the familiar pang of exclusion, the way he wielded authority not just over the company, but over the narrative itself. It was as if my years of dedication were being erased by his bravado, my contributions reduced to nothing more than a footnote in his story. But I wasn't there to be sidelined. The key industry event was an opportunity, a stage where the truth could no longer be hidden behind closed doors or corporate facades. I made my way through the mingling crowd, catching the eyes of familiar faces, clients, partners, and colleagues who had once trusted me. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to guarded hope, as if waiting to see what I might do next. As the event unfolded, it became clear that Martin's performance was unraveling in real time. During a panel discussion, a client I had worked with for years spoke candidly about her frustrations with the company's recent direction. Her words were measured but unmistakable: "We're concerned about the lack of communication and follow-through. It feels like we're no longer a priority." The ripple of murmurs that followed confirmed what I already suspected: Martin's leadership was causing more damage than his polished speeches could mask. Behind the scenes, whispers circulated about deals falling through and key personnel leaving. The facade of control was cracking, and the industry was taking notice. I seized the moment, engaging in conversations that allowed me to share a different vision, one rooted in transparency, collaboration, and respect. I listened more than I spoke, letting the dissatisfaction in the room speak volumes. One afternoon, I found myself face-to-face with a longtime client who had been on the fence since the leadership change. His eyes searched mine, looking for reasons to trust again. "I've been watching how things have unfolded," he said quietly. "Your uncle's approach has shaken my confidence. But I want to believe there's a way back." It was a fragile opening, but it was enough. The public unraveling of Martin's control fueled my determination. I realized that the battle for the company was playing out not just in boardrooms, but in the court of public opinion and client trust. The more I could expose the cracks in his leadership, the stronger my position became. Yet, the experience was bittersweet. Watching Martin stumble publicly brought no joy, only a deepening sorrow for the company and the family torn apart by power struggles. I understood that this wasn't merely a professional conflict, it was a fracture that cut through the core of everything we once believed in. As the event drew to a close, I felt a shift, not just in the room, but within myself. The humiliation Martin faced was a sign that his grip was weakening and that the narrative was beginning to shift. But I also knew that public perception could be as fragile as it was powerful. I needed to act decisively, to channel this moment of vulnerability into a strategic comeback. That night, I sat alone in my hotel room, reviewing the conversations and feedback from the event. The pieces were falling into place, but the path ahead was still fraught with uncertainty. Martin's arrogance had been exposed, but he was far from defeated. I needed allies, evidence, and a plan that would resonate not just with clients, but with the board and stakeholders who held the company's fate in their hands. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. I met with industry experts, legal advisors, and trusted colleagues, sharing insights and gathering support. Each discussion reinforced the urgency of the situation and the need for a comprehensive approach. It wasn't enough to highlight Martin's failures, I had to present a compelling alternative that promised stability and growth. In a quiet moment, I recalled the lessons from my mother, her unwavering belief in integrity and the power of truth. I resolved to embody those principles in every step forward, to fight not with bitterness, but with clarity and purpose. It was a difficult balance, especially as emotions ran high, but I knew it was essential. I also prepared for the inevitable pushback. Martin would not surrender easily, and his network was strong. I anticipated attempts to discredit me, to undermine my credibility and fracture my alliances. But I was ready. The evidence I had gathered, the relationships I was rebuilding, and the strategic plan I was crafting would be my shield. One afternoon, a video surfaced, leaked, anonymous, but unmistakably real. It revealed conversations where Martin and his closest advisors plotted to discredit me publicly, to portray me as unstable and unfit to lead. The calculated nature of their schemes was chilling. It was a stark reminder of the lengths they would go to maintain control. Instead of reacting with anger, I used the video as a catalyst. I shared it discreetly with key allies, framing it as proof of the toxic environment Martin had fostered. The response was immediate and supportive. People who had been hesitant now saw the stakes clearly. The tide was turning, slowly but surely. Amid the turmoil, I found moments of unexpected strength. Conversations with former colleagues who had once doubted me became opportunities to rebuild trust. Clients who had been on the fence offered renewed faith. The narrative was shifting, and I was at the center of it, not as a victim, but as a leader ready to reclaim what had been taken. The public confrontation at the industry event was more than a spectacle, it was a turning point. Martin's veneer of control was cracking, and the company's future was once again up for debate. I could feel the momentum building, the quiet power of truth and resilience gathering like a storm. As I prepared for the battles ahead, I held onto a simple truth: leadership was not about titles or authority, but about trust and vision. Martin had forgotten that. I hadn't. And that difference would define the next chapter in this fight for the company, for the family, and for my own place within both. An unexpected message arrived late one evening, breaking through the tension that had settled over my weeks of strategizing. It was from Mr. Caldwell, an old mentor who had guided me early in my career, a man whose wisdom and connections I had long respected but hadn't reached out to in some time. His words were succinct but powerful: "I hear you're fighting the good fight. Let's talk." That simple invitation sparked a resurgence of hope I hadn't felt in months. Our meeting was discreet, held in a quiet cafe far from the usual industry haunts. Mr. Caldwell's presence was calming, his demeanor steady as he listened to my account of Martin's takeover and the damage I'd uncovered. When I finished, he nodded thoughtfully. "You've got the facts, the tenacity, and the vision. But what you need now are allies who can provide the resources and influence to make change happen." He introduced me to a network of investors and industry leaders, people who had watched the company's decline with concern and were eager for an alternative. The introductions were more than formalities, they were doorways to opportunity. These were individuals who valued integrity and long-term growth over quick profits and power plays. Their interest wasn't just financial, it was personal. With their support, I gained access to crucial resources, market analysis, legal advice, and strategic counsel that bolstered the plan I had been refining. It was a collaborative effort, a coalition of minds focused on restoring the company's legacy. For the first time, I felt surrounded by a genuine team, united not by family ties but by shared values and a commitment to doing what was right. One afternoon, while reviewing new financial data with one of the investors, I uncovered more evidence of Martin's poor decisions. Projects had been rushed without proper oversight, contracts signed without due diligence, and key partnerships neglected. The numbers told a story of reckless management that confirmed everything I feared. This evidence became the backbone of a renewed strategy, a powerful counterpoint to Martin's narrative of control and success. Armed with detailed reports and testimonials, I crafted a presentation that laid bare the consequences of his leadership. It wasn't just about exposing failure, it was about offering a path forward grounded in accountability and vision. Throughout this process, I remained in close contact with Jenna and other trusted employees still inside the company. Their insights were invaluable, revealing the internal struggles and the quiet resistance growing among the staff. They shared stories of projects stalled by indecision, morale crushed by fear, and talent slipping away. These voices added depth and urgency to the case I was building. The coalition's support gave me the confidence to approach the board more formally. I prepared to present not just the evidence of mismanagement, but a comprehensive plan to secure a major deal that could reverse the company's decline. This wasn't a desperate plea, it was a strategic proposal backed by data, expertise, and a network of committed allies. As the day of the presentation approached, I felt the familiar surge of anxiety mingled with determination. This was more than a professional challenge, it was a pivotal moment in a battle that had become deeply personal. I reminded myself of the values that guided me: integrity, resilience, and the belief that leadership meant serving others, not wielding power for its own sake. The meeting with the board was tense. Martin was there, his presence commanding and his demeanor guarded. He dismissed my concerns with practiced ease, painting my efforts as nostalgic and out of touch. But as I laid out the evidence, the numbers, and the testimonials, I saw doubt flicker in the eyes of some directors. The narrative was shifting. Questions followed, sharp, probing, and sometimes hostile. I answered each with clarity and conviction, refusing to be rattled by the attempts to undermine me. The coalition's backing lent weight to my words, and the detailed analysis left little room for dismissal. It was a turning point, a moment when the board had to confront the reality of the company's trajectory under Martin's leadership. After the presentation, discussions continued behind closed doors. I waited, the tension unbearable, knowing that the future of the company, and my role in it, hung in the balance. The hours stretched, each moment a test of patience and resolve. When the board reconvened, the decision was clear. They voted to support my plan and to initiate steps to secure the major deal I had outlined. It was a victory born of persistence, evidence, and the power of alliances built on trust rather than blood. The news spread quietly at first, but it ignited a spark of hope among employees and clients alike. The promise of stability and renewed focus began to restore confidence, and the company started to regain its footing. It was a fragile recovery, but a meaningful one. Throughout this period, I remained mindful of the personal complexities that shadowed every professional move. The family dynamics were tangled and painful, and Martin's resistance was fierce. Yet, I chose to focus on the larger goal, the survival and revival of the company that meant so much to all of us. With the coalition's guidance, I continued to refine the strategic plan, preparing for the next phase of rebuilding. The major deal we pursued was ambitious, but it held the potential to transform the company's fortunes and to signal a new era of leadership grounded in accountability and vision. As I reflected on this chapter of the struggle, I recognized that the journey had reshaped me. The lessons learned, from betrayal to resilience, from isolation to alliance, had forged a strength I hadn't known I possessed. The path was still uncertain, but the foundation was stronger than ever. I was no longer just fighting to reclaim a position, I was fighting to restore a legacy, to honor the values that had once defined us, and to build a future where the company could thrive again. With allies by my side and a clear vision ahead, I was ready to face whatever challenges lay next. The weight of the coming battles pressed down on me like a storm cloud, heavy and relentless. After the board's tentative support, I knew the fight was far from over. Martin's grip on the company was still tight, and the personal wounds between us ran deep. I needed more than just allies and strategy, I needed legal counsel and business advisors who could navigate this minefield of family politics and corporate power. I scheduled a meeting with a seasoned attorney, someone known for handling complex corporate disputes with both precision and discretion. Sitting across from her in a glass-walled office overlooking the city, I laid out the situation, the hostile takeover by my uncle, the evidence of mismanagement, the fractured family dynamics intertwined with company politics. She listened, her expression serious but composed. "You're walking a delicate line," she said. "Family disputes like this can get messy, not just legally but emotionally. But with the right approach, you can protect your interests and challenge the mismanagement effectively." Her words were a mix of caution and encouragement, an acknowledgement of the stakes and the possibilities. Together, we mapped out the legal landscape, identifying potential avenues to hold Martin accountable and safeguard the company's assets. We discussed freezing certain actions he had taken, scrutinizing contracts signed without proper oversight, and preparing for any attempts he might make to discredit me. The plan was thorough, designed to anticipate obstacles and counter them before they could take root. Alongside legal strategies, I worked closely with business advisors who helped me refine the comprehensive plan I had been developing. Their insights sharpened my approach, highlighting risks and opportunities one hadn't fully considered. They emphasized the importance of presenting a united front to the board and stakeholders, one that combined fiscal responsibility with a clear vision for renewal. Emotionally, the preparation was draining. I spent long nights wrestling with the tangled web of family betrayal and professional ambition. The lines blurred, and I often found myself questioning how to separate personal pain from strategic necessity. But I reminded myself that this was more than a family feud, it was a fight to preserve the company's legacy and protect the livelihoods of countless employees. In quieter moments, I reflected on the values that had guided me since the beginning: integrity, resilience, and the belief that leadership was a responsibility, not a privilege. Those principles became my anchor, steadying me through the turbulent waters ahead. The most daunting task was preparing to present the multi-million-dollar deal that could turn the tide. This wasn't just a business transaction, it was a statement, a signal to the board, clients, and employees that the company was ready to reclaim its position and embrace a future built on accountability and growth. I worked with the advisors to craft every detail of the proposal, ensuring it was both ambitious and realistic. We modeled financial projections, risk assessments, and strategic benefits, anticipating questions and objections. The goal was to leave no doubt that this deal was not just viable, but essential. As the presentation date approached, I felt a mix of anxiety and determination. The stakes had never been higher. This was my moment to prove that I was not just the rightful heir to the company's leadership, but the one best equipped to guide it forward. I practiced relentlessly, refining my delivery and preparing for tough questions. I knew Martin would be there, ready to challenge every claim and undermine my credibility. But I was ready. This was more than a battle of words, it was a test of vision, evidence, and resolve. On the day of the presentation, the boardroom was packed with key stakeholders, advisors, and, of course, Martin. The atmosphere was thick with tension, a palpable sense of history unfolding. I began by acknowledging the company's challenges, not shying away from the truth, but framing it as an opportunity for renewal. I laid out the evidence of mismanagement, supported by data and testimonials, then transitioned to the strategic plan and the major deal. I emphasized the benefits, not just financial gains, but the restoration of trust, the revitalization of culture, and the long-term vision for sustainable growth. Questions came fast and sharp. Directors grilled me on projections, risk mitigation, and my readiness to lead. I answered each with confidence, drawing on the expertise of my advisors and the coalition behind me. Martin, silent for much of the presentation, finally spoke, his tone dismissive, his arguments predictable. But the room had shifted. The seeds of doubt had been planted. After hours of discussion, the board recessed to deliberate. The waiting was agonizing, each minute stretching into an eternity. I sat quietly, surrounded by allies and advisors, steeling myself for whatever outcome awaited. When the board reconvened, the decision was announced, my plan was approved, and steps would be taken to implement the deal and begin restoring the company's leadership and reputation. It was a victory, hard-won and deeply significant. In the days that followed, I focused on managing the transition, working with legal teams to freeze problematic actions, coordinating with clients and partners to reassure them, and supporting employees caught in the uncertainty. The company was fragile, but the path forward was clear. Through it all, I kept returning to the lessons learned, about resilience, about the true meaning of leadership, and about the power of integrity in the face of adversity. The journey had tested me in ways I hadn't imagined, but it had also revealed a strength I was only beginning to understand. The fight was far from over, but with the legal and emotional groundwork laid, I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The company's future, and my own, depended on it. The day the deal finalized felt surreal, as if the ground beneath the company had shifted, tilting us all towards something new, uncertain, but hopeful. I sat in the boardroom, the weight of months of struggle pressing down on me, yet beneath it, cautious optimism began to stir. The multi-million-dollar agreement brought not only vital revenue but a renewed sense of purpose, a lifeline that could steady the company's faltering course. News spread quickly among employees and clients, rippling through the organization like a fresh breeze after a long, suffocating storm. I saw the change in their eyes, the guarded hope, the tentative trust returning after so much doubt. It was fragile, yes, but it was there. The company was waking from a long, dark slumber. Martin's reaction was immediate and visceral. His facade of control cracked as stakeholders began to question his leadership openly. The board, once hesitant, started voicing concerns about his decisions and the damage they had wrought. The tension that had simmered beneath the surface erupted into heated debates and strategic realignments. The power balance was shifting. In meetings, I noticed the subtle but unmistakable shift in dynamics. Where Martin had once dominated conversations, now voices rose in opposition, challenging his authority and decisions. The company's future was no longer a foregone conclusion dictated by his will. Instead, it became a contested space where ideas, values, and visions clashed and, for the first time in months, aligned towards something better. The family tensions escalated alongside the corporate ones. Private conversations became battlegrounds for loyalty and resentment. Martin's attempts to undermine the deal and my role intensified, veiled in polite language but sharp with underlying threats. It was clear he saw this moment as a fight for survival, not just for control. Despite the growing conflict, I remained focused on the broader goal, rebuilding the company and restoring its reputation. I met with clients personally, assuring them of the company's renewed commitment and stability. I worked alongside employees, listening to their concerns and encouraging their engagement in the turnaround. Every interaction was a step toward healing the fractures that Martin's leadership had deepened. One afternoon, I received a message from a longtime employee who had been silent during the upheaval. "Thank you," she wrote simply, "for believing in us when it felt like no one else did." Her words were a reminder of why this fight mattered, not just for profits or power, but for the people whose livelihoods depended on the company's survival. As the company began to stabilize, I took on a more active leadership role, guiding strategic initiatives and fostering a culture of transparency and collaboration. It was a delicate balance, asserting authority without alienating those still loyal to Martin, rebuilding trust while managing ongoing tensions. The path was anything but smooth. There were setbacks and moments of doubt. Yet, each challenge reinforced the importance of resilience and the power of a shared vision. Slowly, the company's legacy began to reclaim its place, not as a relic of the past but as a foundation for the future. Behind the scenes, Martin's influence waned. His attempts to rally support faltered as the board and key stakeholders aligned with the new direction. The family rift remained, painful and unresolved, but the company's fate was no longer tethered solely to his will. Reflecting on these months, I recognized the profound transformation, not just of the company, but of myself. The journey from ousting to leadership had tested my resolve, challenged my beliefs, and ultimately strengthened my sense of purpose. I learned that true leadership required more than authority. It demanded humility, courage, and the ability to inspire others. The company was no longer a battlefield but a place of possibility, a space where past wounds could begin to heal, and new chapters could be written. The fight for the company's soul had been fierce, but the victory, though still fragile, was real. As I prepared for the challenges ahead, I held on to the lessons of this chapter, the necessity of perseverance, the value of integrity, and the strength found in unity. The company's story was still unfolding, and I was ready to lead it into whatever future awaited. Weeks after the deal's success began to reshape the company's trajectory, I received an unexpected message: Martin wanted to meet. The invitation was cautious, tinged with desperation. His empire was crumbling, and for the first time, he sought an audience not to assert dominance, but to plead for a job. The irony was bitter. The man who had thrown me out was now asking for a place at the table he once claimed as his own. When we met, the tension was palpable. Martin's posture was less rigid, his eyes shadowed with fatigue and regret. He spoke carefully, acknowledging mistakes and the fractures his leadership had caused. I underestimated the challenge, he admitted. Maybe I was wrong to push you out. The company needs stability, and maybe that means working together. His words stirred a complex mix of emotions, resentment, pity, and a flicker of hope. Could I forgive him? Could I find a way to bridge the chasm between us? The wounds ran deep, and trust was fragile, but I saw in his vulnerability a chance for something different. Not reconciliation for its own sake, but a pragmatic step toward healing a family and a business torn apart. I listened, weighing the sincerity behind his words. Forgiveness wasn't a gift I could give lightly, it was something that required boundaries and clarity. I told him that if we were to work together, it would be on new terms, terms that prioritized transparency, accountability, and respect. The past could not be erased, but the future could be negotiated. Martin agreed, though I sensed his struggle to let go of old patterns. We discussed roles, responsibilities, and the need for clear communication. It was a fragile truce, a tentative step toward collaboration that neither of us could take for granted. But it was a start. In the days that followed, I reflected on what this meant for me, not just as a leader, but as a person shaped by betrayal and resilience. Forgiveness was not weakness, it was a conscious choice to move forward without the weight of endless grudges. But it was also a boundary, a line drawn to protect what I had fought so hard to reclaim. I continued to assert my leadership, guiding the company through its recovery while navigating the delicate dynamics with Martin. It was a balancing act, embracing the opportunity for renewed partnership without sacrificing the values that defined me. The family's history was complicated, and healing would take time, but I was committed to forging a path that honored both our past and our potential. The experience deepened my understanding of resilience and grace. I realized that standing firm didn't mean closing off, it meant opening the door to change while holding fast to one's principles. Leadership, I learned, was as much about forgiveness as it was about strength. As the company stabilized and began to thrive once more, I turned inward to consider the legacy I wanted to build, not just in boardrooms and balance sheets, but in the culture and spirit of the business. I envisioned a future where trust and collaboration were paramount, where past wounds informed but did not define our journey. In that spirit, I took steps to honor those values tangibly. I created a scholarship fund in the name of Bryn, Vera's daughter, an investment in the future that transcended family conflicts and toxic legacies. It was my way of ensuring that the next generation had opportunities free from the shadows that had loomed over us. The scholarship became a symbol of hope and renewal, a bridge between fractured histories and a brighter tomorrow. It was a reminder that family and leadership were about more than power. They were about responsibility, compassion, and the courage to build something better. When Vera reached out to me for a conversation, I approached it with cautious curiosity. Our meeting was civil but guarded, a negotiation of boundaries and motives. I sought to understand her perspective, to find common ground where possible, but I remained firm in my resolve to protect the company's integrity and the values I stood for. The dialogue was difficult, a reflection of the tangled web of history and hurt. Yet, it was also a testament to the possibility of dialogue amidst conflict, of seeking understanding without sacrificing truth. I emerged from it with a clearer vision of what I was willing to accept and what I would not compromise. Looking back on this journey, from being cast out to reclaiming leadership, I saw a tapestry woven with pain, determination, and growth. I had learned that family was not just about bloodlines, but about standing up for what was right, even when it meant standing alone. And that true leadership required both strength and the willingness to forgive, to build bridges that could carry us forward. The company's future was no longer a battleground but a canvas, one where I could paint a legacy of resilience, integrity, and hope. The fight had been fierce, but it had also been transformative. And as I stepped into this new chapter, I carried with me the lessons of the past and the promise of what was yet to come. Taking the reins again felt both familiar and profoundly different. The weight of leadership settled on my shoulders, not as a burden, but as a responsibility I embraced with clear eyes and steady hands. The company, once fractured and faltering, was slowly healing, shaped by the lessons of conflict and the promise of renewal. In the quiet moments between meetings and decisions, I reflected on the complexity of family and business intertwined. Blood ties had been tested, stretched to breaking, and yet within that tension lay an opportunity, a chance to redefine what family meant beyond shared names or histories. It was about values, respect, and a commitment to something larger than ourselves. I focused on rebuilding the company's legacy with intentionality. Transparency became a cornerstone of our culture, a deliberate shift from the secrecy and fear that had once dominated. I fostered open communication channels with employees at every level, encouraging dialogue and collaboration. The transformation was not instantaneous, but the gradual change in atmosphere was palpable, hope replacing suspicion, engagement replacing resignation. Strategic initiatives were launched with a renewed emphasis on innovation balanced with fiscal responsibility. We revisited partnerships, nurturing those built on trust and mutual benefit, while cautiously stepping away from relationships that no longer aligned with our values. Each decision was a thread in the fabric of a revived company identity. Personally, I committed to leading by example, demonstrating resilience, humility, and the courage to make difficult choices. The scars of the past remained, but they were no longer sources of pain alone, they were reminders of strength forged through adversity. I carried them as badges of experience, guiding me toward wiser, more compassionate leadership. The scholarship fund in Bryn's name blossomed into more than a financial aid program. It became a symbol of our commitment to future generations, a bridge across divides and a beacon of hope. Supporting young talent, especially those touched by the family's complex history, was a way to honor the past while investing in a better future. As the company stabilized and growth resumed, I found moments to reconnect with family members once estranged by conflict. The conversations were cautious and often difficult, but they opened pathways for healing and understanding. I learned that reconciliation was not about erasing history but about acknowledging it and choosing to move forward with respect and grace. The business landscape continued to evolve, presenting new challenges and opportunities. Yet, armed with the hard-won wisdom of the journey, I approached each with confidence rooted in experience and values. The company was no longer just a reflection of legacy, it was a living, breathing entity shaped by collective effort and shared vision. Looking back, I saw that the fight to reclaim my place was not just about power or position. It was about preserving integrity in the face of betrayal, about standing firm when the world seemed to conspire against me. It was about learning that true leadership requires both strength and compassion, the ability to hold firm and yet remain open. The scars and stories I carried were part of that leadership, a testament to endurance and the unyielding belief that family and business could coexist with honor. I understood now that legacy was not merely inherited but built daily through actions and choices. As I stood at the helm, guiding the company into uncharted waters, I felt a profound sense of purpose. This was more than a career revival, it was a mission to honor the past while forging a new path forward, for the company, for the family, and for myself. In the end, I realized that family isn't just about shared blood or history. It's about the courage to stand for what's right, the resilience to face adversity head-on, and the grace to build bridges when possible. It's about creating a legacy that reflects not just who we are, but who we aspire to be. And so, with resolve and hope, I stepped into the future, not alone, but carrying the lessons, the scars, and the dreams of all who had shaped this journey. The story was far from over, but it was mine to write. If you loved the story, like the video and subscribe.